Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Having retirement questions isn't uniquely an American thing. I recently saw this article titled, "I have 5 years to build a retirement pot from scratch. What can I do with £1,000,000?" It was really interesting to read about this gentleman, and while he is 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean in London, his situation is very much something that we could easily see in the United States. So I thought it would make a fun case study. Now this gentleman, I do believe the proper pronunciation for his last name is Gilles, but I wouldn't trust me honestly when it comes to pronouncing someone's name correctly. And being that I am an American-based channel and predominantly my audience is based here in the US, I am going to Americanize this entire example as well as his name for my sake, so he is henceforth going to be known as Mr. Gill, and that could also be an homage to one of my favorite high school teachers. So here are the details of this gentleman's situation. He is 65 years old with the hopes of retiring at 70. Mr. Gill has very modest financial resources to fall back on because he fell into the trap that so many fall into. As his income increased, so too did his spending, and recently he and his wife divorced. He and his wife jointly own a home worth $1.1 million, which will be split 50-50 upon its sale. Mr. Gill is hoping to take his $550,000 and buy his next home outright in cash. He has modest savings outside of his home, totaling $30,000, and a modest pension of $28,000 a year. The good news is that he is in his peak earning years, making $200,000 a year through freelance work, and he's willing to work for another 5 years. So he's assuming he's going to earn $1,000,000 over the next 5 years, and he wants to know, can he build a comfortable retirement in 5 years' time? Notably, Mr. Gill does have 4 adult children, all of which he says are financially stable. He's happy to offer small financial gifts here and there, but he's not planning on leaving any sort of inheritance outside of his residence. So let's look at what kind of retirement Mr. Gill could build himself within the next 5 years. I love this gentleman's plan to take his proceeds from the sale of the home with his ex-wife to purchase a new home. Buying a modest home and buying it outright is a great financial move, especially for retirement. It'll give this gentleman more stable financial costs. Of course, he'll still have things like property tax and maintenance and insurance, and all of those things do have a cost. But not having a monthly mortgage looming over your head is invaluable in retirement. My 2 cents when it comes to housing is go as modest as you are comfortable going. You will never regret buying a more modest home and having more room within your budget. I love this gentleman's plan to buy the home outright, but if he can even go under the budget of $550,000 and leave himself some wiggle room, maybe for future maintenance costs, future repairs, or property taxes, I think he will find that to be an invaluable maneuver. So if he can create even a little bit more room within this housing budget, I think that can be a great move. It's so nice that he has a pension, even if it is modest. A pension is an amazing benefit, but the largest issue that needs to be addressed here is that this gentleman has been spending nearly all of his entire income, the pension plus his $200,000 a year annual income. Now again, because we're making this a US-based example, if this gentleman was earning $200,000 a year in the US, after taxes, his take-home pay would look more like $150,000 a year. Then we could put the pension on top of that $28,000 a year, and so he'd have a workable income of about $178,000 a year, depending on how that pension is treated when it comes to taxes. But being that this gentleman is essentially starting from scratch when it comes to saving for his retirement, I'm going to suggest something aggressive. I think he should be saving about 50% of his income. He should be putting roughly maybe $90,000 a year towards retirement and savings. If he could swing even cutting a little bit more and saving a little bit more, I think that would be better, but we're already asking him to essentially cut his expenses in half. We're asking him to make a lot of cuts. We do have to ask him to make these cuts because he essentially doesn't have anything for retirement or in investments. So we have to ask him to make these cuts if he ever hopes to retire and have a comfortable retirement. So if over the next 5 years, he can put $90,000 a year into investments and he can capture a roughly 5% rate of return, by the time he's 70, he could have about $615,000 as a nest egg. Add in his $30,000 that he already has in savings, and that would put him in a position where he had a fully paid off home and $645,000 to fund his retirement. It's probably worth taking a moment to talk about what this gentleman might be investing in, being that he's so close to retirement. He's already 65 and is planning an exit from the workforce at 70. We probably want a fair amount of his portfolio in conservative funds, something like T-bills, laddered CDs, or maybe a money market fund. But being that you can still find items in these classes that are guaranteeing a 4.5% rate of return or even just under a 5% rate of return, I think assuming he can capture a 5% rate of return is a very realistic stance. And just because I say a decent portion of this gentleman's fund should be going towards stable investments, that's not saying he shouldn't have anything invested in stocks. He could live another 15, 20 or more years. So the goal with his portfolio is to create a balance so he has a stable income for the near future as well as growth potential for the long term. Now, how conservatively or aggressively this gentleman should be invested really depends on his own personal risk tolerance. Maybe he's looking at a portfolio with a 60-40 split, stocks and bonds, or maybe he's looking at something like a 50-50 split. It really depends on his personal risk tolerance. Considering account type would also be another factor at play here. This gentleman is a freelancer, so if he establishes a retirement fund within his own company, maybe he establishes a traditional retirement fund, and in that case, he would be contributing pre-tax dollars. At a later date, when he starts to draw on these funds in retirement, he would owe income taxes, but it's likely that he would be in a lower tax bracket at that time. On the other hand, if he decides to use a Roth, the income would come out completely tax-free in his retirement years. It's also worth noting if he utilizes something like T-bills, they are not subject to local or state taxes. Now, is this an aggressive savings rate? Yes, it absolutely is, but there's a couple of reasons I suggested. One, he's a high income earner, so I believe he has the room within his budget to have this kind of savings rate. Also, he is 65 years old and planning on retiring in 5 years at the age of 70. And currently he has little, if anything, when it comes to investments. So he has a very short timetable to work with to build a comfortable retirement. Also, he has expressed that in retirement, he has the desire to travel. He enjoys the arts. He wants to go to museums and go to the theater. I want him to be able to enjoy those activities now, but I also want him to be able to enjoy those activities in retirement. So we need to send him into retirement with a decent nest egg in order to make that possible. As we look ahead 5 years, and this gentleman is now 70 years old, we will assume that he now has a nest egg of $645,000 to fund his retirement, that he has a pension income of $28,000 a year. The good news is that this article says this gentleman would be eligible for about $13,500 a year from a state pension, or what we might otherwise look at as something similar to Social Security here in the States. Well, as this gentleman looks to fund his retirement, we have to consider that he's stepped away from the workforce at a later age. So that means he can likely use a more aggressive rate of withdrawal. Perhaps he's more comfortable using something like a 6% rate of withdrawal. Now let's talk about this 6% figure for a minute. I can already sense that I'm going to get some heat for it, but I did not pull this number out of a hat. If we look at the Trinity study, the study that brought us the 4% rule and indoctrinated that as gospel into all of our minds as the safe rate of withdrawal over a 30-year retirement, that same study says that over a 20-year retirement, a 6% rate of withdrawal has a 95% success rate. So if a retiree were to withdraw 6% of their portfolio every single year, there is a 95% chance that they would be successful in withdrawing that amount and not running out of money. So if this gentleman were to take 6% of his portfolio, that would give him an income of $38,700 per year. Combined with his pension income of $28,000 a year and $13,500 a year in Social Security income, that would give him an annual income of just over $80,000 a year. Now, one thing to note, yes, this is going to be a lesser standard of living than he was used to when he was spending his entire $200,000 income. It is also going to be a slight step down from the past 5 years than when he was saving 50% of his income and living off $90,000 $20,000 a year. If he's willing to save a little bit more during these final 5 years, he might be able to step into retirement and maintain his same standard of living. But like I said, he does have to make some cuts. And study after study shows us that spending in retirement is not static. It is not the same from year to year. In some years, retirees spend more, and in other years, retirees spend less. This gentleman could employ a strategy like that. He could have years where he allowed himself to travel more, so he spends more. He could also have years where he doesn't travel and he stays closer to home and maybe visits more museums. And in those years, he could spend drastically less. He has flexibility here. Another significant consideration for Mr. Gill here is that he is a freelancer. Yes, notably, he works full-time right now. But the good news is that being a freelancer gives you a lot of control over your employment. Now, for some people, once they hit retirement age, they want to step away from the workforce completely. They look at it as, I have put in my decades of work, I want to be done, I want to spend time on activities that just bring me joy, and that is a fine choice. Other people hit retirement and maybe they just want more flexibility with their time. Maybe they wouldn't mind continuing working on a part-time basis or even on a very minimal basis if it meant that they just got more time for hobbies, for friends, for activities, just more freedom overall. Mr. Gills is able to currently work a full schedule and bring in about $200,000 a year. What if he hits the age of 70, but he doesn't retire from work completely? What if he works on a very minimal basis, maybe with one client or two clients, and he's able to bring in an income of, say, $20,000, $30,000, or $40,000? This would allow him a lot of flexibility within his schedule, and that additional income could allow a lot of options for his retirement. It would allow him to travel more and give him more freedom and more spending power. No matter how he wants to approach his retirement, I do think he needs to make drastic cuts today. I do think he needs to save aggressively, because for someone who is used to spending all of a high income, I think it only makes sense to build some kind of cushion to fall back on. It's always best to prepare for the day where you may not be able to work. The hope is that you get to step away from the workforce on your own terms. But that is not always the case. So the way I look at his situation is, yes, he has to make some cuts, but if he's willing to make some cuts and if he's willing to save aggressively, he can still have a very comfortable retirement. What are your thoughts on Mr. Gill's Americanized version of this case study? Leave them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.